Right, good morning everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. My name is Frank Mitloehner. I'm at UC Davis, and I didn't really know what the precautionary principle was until I received my invitation here. But be assured that I've been living and breathing the precautionary principle in California, because that's what we're dealing with. We are dealing with pretty intense public scrutiny of animal agriculture and all of its components. And I am an air quality specialist, and as you can imagine, air quality is a big deal in a state like ours. And livestock plays a significant role in this overall theme. When I started there in 2002, cattle, both dairy and beef, were considered the #1 source of air pollution in the state of California, forming smog. And I thought I couldn't believe my ears when I heard that, but the newspapers were full of articles titled that cows rival cars as smog producers. What I found very quickly was that there was a huge paucity of data on what livestock's contribution to air pollution was. And so what I found through early investigation was that what the air regulatory agencies used was data from 1938. Data from 1938 that had nothing to do with smog-forming gases, but everything to do with methane. And not just was it very outdated, it was totally unrelated to smog formation. Anyhow, precautionary principle, I can tell you, I'm living and breathing precautionary principle. This here is a slide showing California. It shows the Sierra Nevada on the one side, the coastal mountain range on the other side, and then this milky stuff here, that's the Great Central Valley. This is where 20% of the U.S. dairy is housed, and this is also where we have the worst air quality in the United States. This area here, as you can see, I'm very advanced with my laser pointer here. This area here is Fresno. This is the location with the worst air quality in the United States. And it's right in the heart of dairy country. And so the #2 is Los Angeles down here. #3 is Houston, Texas. And so once you live in an area like that, and once you're surrounded by cows, then people put one and one together and say, there clearly is cause and effect. So this slide is a slide I show to any kind of audience I present to. It shows what we are dealing with in a state like California. And this is really, to me, a worst-case scenario slide. It shows a fence line, and on the one side of the fence, it shows 1,000 cows in the Central Valley of California. On the other side of the fence, it shows 1,000 encroaching residential residencies. And believe me, in a court of law, it doesn't really matter who was there first. What matters is who is posing a nuisance. That's what matters. That's the only thing that matters in a court of law. And so this is something that we really try to avoid by all means, but because of land prices in California, people are now looking into those areas where land is relatively cheap. Not that land here is cheap, but relatively cheap compared to other places. So, as an air quality specialist, I deal with egg-urban conflict like this one here frequently, but I also deal with international issues. Let's say air pollution that is not just regional or national, but also international. An example is this slide here. It shows the Pacific here, surrounded by my laser. Australia down here, China there, and then the United States here. It's generated over here in China, and 4 days later it reaches California. If you think that all the pollution that we measure in a place like California comes from California, think again. That's not to say that we don't have issues in California, but it's only to say that air pollution is an issue that you cannot just look at regionally. You really have to look at the broader picture. If we really want to work on air quality in California, we also have to think of places like China. So I spend about 20% of my time in places like China for that very reason. That if they don't clean up over there, then we will have big issues over here. Now, precautionary principle, many of you in the room will be very critical when hearing discussions of climate change and how livestock plays into climate change. Let me tell you, climate change has been a huge issue in and around animal agriculture, and particularly for those people in the public that are anti-animal agriculture. The whole issue of what the carbon footprint of food choices are that we make is a very prevalent one out there. And people assume that if you eat animal protein, then you will have a greater effect on the carbon footprint compared to a plant-based diet. What this slide here shows is something that I would say is indicative of regional impacts of climate change. First of all, climate change, some people say, well, does climate change really happen? Does it not happen? That really is not the discussion. The discussion is not whether climate change happens. It has always happened. There always has been an up and down in world average temperatures. That's not the question. The question is whether or not a heating trend that was observed over the last couple of decades, except for the last decades, but the previous couple of decades, whether that heating trend is caused by human activity. That's the question. It's not a question whether climate change takes place. The question is, are humans to be blamed through their activity of causing it? So this slide here, for example, shows what we can see from satellites. That's not really debatable because it's observable. And it shows the ice cap over the North Pole here in yellow 10 years ago, and in white it shows it as it is now. And we see different regions in the world changing. We see places in Russia changing and the tundra changing. We see previously frozen soil thawing and releasing vast quantity of methane gas. We see those changes occurring from satellites. So I have no doubt that we are seeing some climatic trends affecting different regions in the world. The question really is, how much is livestock to be blamed? And according to the media, livestock are one of the main causing factors behind that. And so my talk to you is really kind of shedding some light on that. What you see here is just a little background as to what greenhouse gases are and what the whole issue of the greenhouse gas effect is. So you have the sun radiating down solar beams to the surface of the Earth. They are then reflected back off from Earth. Normally they would go back into space, but there are the so-called greenhouse gases, and these greenhouse gases basically are heat trapping. When these compounds, these molecules are hit by a solar beam, they trap the heat. Just like a beverage container traps the heat of your coffee, they trap the heat of the sun. And so there are different types of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is one, methane is another one. The third major one is nitrous oxide. And these different gases differ with respect to how much heat they can trap. So here is a depiction. This is kind of really important. And I really want to make sure everybody in the room gets it because it is at the heart of the discussion. It shows CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, the three main greenhouse gases associated with animal agriculture. As I just said, these greenhouse gases differ with respect to how much heat they can trap. I'll give you an analogy. If you put coffee, the same coffee, into a styrofoam cup, into a China cup, and into a Starbucks $20 insulated cup, then you know that the coffee will stay warm different length of time in these three cups. The same is true for these greenhouse gases. CO2 is the styrofoam cup, methane is the China cup, and nitrous oxide is the Starbucks $20 insulated cup. This thing here traps the heat 300 times better than CO2. Methane traps it 25 times better than CO2. And that's referred to as the global warming potential of these gases. The global warming potential, roughly 120 and 300. That's the global warming potential of these three greenhouse gases. Why is that so important? That is so important because there are people out there that whip the data until they confess. And the way they do this is by manipulating the global warming potential of these gases. Very recently, the Bill Gates Foundation put out a press release saying that livestock contributes to 50% of all greenhouse gases globally. 50% of all greenhouse gases come from livestock, according to Bill Gates. Bill Gates gets this from a so-called World Watch Institute, an organization of 3 individuals, one of whom has passed recently. And that organization, the World Watch Institute, said that methane is not 20 or 25 times more potent than CO2, but according to the World Watch Institute, again a big name and nothing behind it, according to them, methane is not 20 or 25 times more potent than CO2, but according to them, it's 70% more potent. And if you change a factor like this from 20 or 25 up to 70, then of course the total contribution of that sector, in this case livestock, increases dramatically. And then you have people like the Bill Gates Foundation putting this out in a press release. You also found that same number put out in the New York Times by my special friend Mark Bittner, who wrote a column about this, or who had somebody write a column about that. Now this is how you can confuse the public. No end. Now why am I saying this? I'm not saying this to defend animal agriculture. I'm not saying it for that purpose at all. I'm just saying it because they are really manipulating science in a way that I've never seen before. Now, coming back to science and what the majority of scientists think human contribution to climate change is. The majority of scientists would say that the number one contribution of humans to greenhouse gases is through the use of fossil fuel. Fossil fuel being oil, gas, and coal. On this side, in the bottom panel here, you see the total carbon use from 1750 to 2000. So that's basically when within that time period, fossil fuel, again, oil, gas, and coal was used. And as you can see, the vast majority of the usage occurred really between 1950 and now. That's the period when we've taken approximately half of the fossil fuel that was previously stored in the ground out of the ground. So we've taken that carbon out of the ground. And what did we do with the carbon? We burned it. And so something that was in the ground for a long, long time, we've taken out during a very short period of time, and we burned it, and now it's in the atmosphere. So the vast majority of scientists who believe that humans contribute to climate change would say that fossil fuel use is to be blamed primarily. Okay? And among those saying that is the EPA. The EPA says that the following sources are the main contributors to greenhouse gases in the United States. And that's important for you to know, because this is at the heart of the public policy campaign against animal agriculture. On the x-axis, you see the years 1990 to 2008. Nothing has changed after 2008, by the way. On the y-axis, you see the total amount of greenhouse gases in CO2 equivalent. What you see, according to the EPA, is that the vast majority of greenhouse gases are associated with the use of energy. What they mean by that is that the transportation sector and energy production and use make up the vast majority of greenhouse gases produced in the United States. According to the EPA, agriculture, and that's this dark gray area here, contributes to 6% of all greenhouse gases in the United States. These are numbers that are important for you. Agriculture as a whole contributes to 6% of all greenhouse gases in the United States, according to the Federal Emission Inventory of the United States. 6%. Of the 6, approximately half is from animal agriculture. According to the EPA, all of animal agriculture combined produces 3.4% of all greenhouse gases. All of animal agriculture combined contributes to 3.4% of all greenhouse gases. According to the EPA, transportation, so cars, trucks, trains, planes, ships, combined make up for 26% of all greenhouse gases. And according to the EPA, energy production and use make up for 31% of all greenhouse gases. Those are numbers that are important because they give you a relative importance with respect to the official emission inventories. When we do research at our campus and across the country, we find that the number 3.4% is actually credible. The EPA number is actually credible, and I support that number. Now, this is a very important number because of the following. If you think of all the discussion about Meatless Monday, everybody here has heard about Meatless Monday, I assume, then you will know that places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, several communities in Colorado have declared themselves officially Meatless Monday. That means all the public buildings will no longer serve animal protein on Mondays. Schools included. All of the public buildings. Think about that for a second. The reason being that livestock contributes to so much of the nation's greenhouse gases. You just saw what the EPA says the total contribution of livestock is. So how do they come up with that? They come up with that because of a report that came out in 2006 by the United Nations FAO. This report was titled Livestock's Long Shadow, and I'm sure everybody in this room has heard about this report. Livestock's Long Shadow was very instrumental in informing the world's public, and particularly the interested media, about livestock's contribution to environmental degradation. What Livestock's Long Shadow said was that the livestock sector is a major player responsible for 18% of all greenhouse gases. And it said in its executive summary that the livestock sector contributes to more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. That number is a number we cannot get rid of. We cannot get rid of that number even though it has been retracted, it has been denied and so on for many times. What we also cannot get rid of is the last one here. This is a higher share than transportation. Not too long ago I watched a TV show, Mitloehner, and he said, and I quote, according to the United Nations FAO, he said, if you drive a Prius and you eat one burger a week, then that's the same as driving a Hummer. Millions of people watch that and think, oh my gosh, think about how impactful my food choices are. This is just horrific. Right? That's what people think. The reason why I have such a hard time with that is, of course, it's cute. Everybody has some smarts about that. But it's really dangerous. Why is that so dangerous? It is so dangerous because it leads people to believe that their transportation or other choices are inconsequential. What really matters is what you eat. And the very vocal vegan friends within this country use numbers like that and hit it around your heads left, right, and center. And we hear those numbers and we cannot get rid of it. Now, right after this report came out, my team took it on to find out whether or not what we experienced previously in California, namely that outdated numbers were used or numbers were misinterpreted, whether or not that also applied to the FAO numbers. And what we found was the following, and we published this, of course, in a peer-reviewed journal. We found that, first of all, the 18% number is a global number that cannot and must not be used regionally because it includes a 3.4% number for the US. It also includes a 50% number for Paraguay, and it includes a 90% number for Ethiopia. If you now put all those countries in one pot and generate an average, then that average is a number, let's say 18%, though it's now lower, that cannot and must not be used for the US or Paraguay or Ethiopia because it would be wrong in every single instance. And the FAO never intended that number to be used in those individual regions. It's a global number. But we also found that the comparison of the livestock sector to the transportation sector was significantly flawed. And we published that. And why was it flawed? It was flawed because they used different methodologies to assess the impact of livestock versus assessing the impact for transportation. For livestock, they used a so-called life cycle assessment in which you look at everything from soils to crops to pesticides, herbicides, transportation of goods, refrigeration, the whole thing. For the transportation sector, they only looked at tailpipe emissions. They didn't look at the whole life cycle, including production of steel, rubber, roads, airports, harbors, getting the oil out of the ground in Saudi Arabia, shipping it to Texas, refining it, getting it to the gas stations, and then burning it, but only the burning of gas. So they used a very comprehensive method for livestock and a very superficial one for transportation, but compared them side by side. And that comparison we cannot get rid of. You will read this quote here in Martha Stewart in Sunset Magazine and everywhere you can think of. Okay, you cannot get rid of it. So we published in a peer-reviewed journal our criticism, and the BBC in London was the first one to pick up on that. They wrote about this problem we saw with this FAO report, and they quoted one of the authors of this report as saying, I must say honestly that he, Mitloehner, has a point. We factored in everything for meat emissions, and we didn't do the same thing for transportation. So the FAO agreed with our criticism and took that comparison between livestock and transportation back. Now that's a big deal, as you can imagine. That is a big deal if the #1 international organization for agriculture and forestry puts out a report and then retracts parts of its conclusions. So it then went throughout the rest of the media, some very good and some really atrocious stories were written. But it was out. This article alone here was read by 20 million people. That's of course part of our job as a faculty member at a public university to get into contact with the public on issues of their interest. But the horse had left the barn, and people in animal agriculture were too quiet. Just that simple. And that's where the precautionary principle comes into play. It was nothing but retroactive what happened. It was not proactive at all. And what I see when I see agriculture and its contribution to climate change is that people are largely in denial. Say, we don't believe in it, or if it happens, well, it happens. Basically, leave us alone with this topic. But the public is so interested in this topic, we are pushing so hard that agriculture's view is viewed very critically by large sectors of society. This slide here was taken by me in Sweden. It shows three burgers, a tofu burger, a turkey burger, and a beef burger. And those blue bubbles associated with these burgers are not the price tags, but the carbon footprints. That's not just happening in Sweden, it's happening all over the world now. And if you wonder whether it happens here, yes, but at a different level. Here it happens by organizations like Walmart or McDonald's or so, asking their suppliers what the carbon footprint of a gallon of milk is, or the carbon footprint of a pound of beef, or whether that beef was raised sustainably or not. So all of a sudden we have these discussions at hand that are forced upon this industry by very large retailers and food chains and so on. It's a real discussion. This is not something that will go away in a couple of months. This has already been with us since 2006. We are now in 2014. Here you see how Toyota deals with that, comparing their beautiful Prius with horrendous sheep. Okay? And underneath you see the how green the Prius is versus the sheep. Okay? So they're all using this. I mean, it's going throughout the entire advertisement area. It's going through the media day to day. Now, this slide is something that you've all come across many times. It shows on the x-axis the year 1750 to 2050. You've all heard of the 2050 challenge. But I want to put it into a different perspective. The FAO and others actually are right in thinking about how do we feed those growing populations? How do we satisfy the dramatic increase in animal protein in the years to come? This slide shows here approximately the point where I was born, when we had 3.5 billion people in the world. Okay, around 1970 we had 3.5 billion people in the world. Today we have twice as many. We have 7 billion people in the world. And once I'm an old man, we will have 9.2, 9.5 billion people in the world. Throughout my lifetime, human population on this planet will have tripled. Tripled. And that's dramatic if you think about it that way. And also, this slide shows where this increase in human population will happen. It will not happen in the so-called first world, industrialized world, where we tapered off, but it will happen in the third world, in emerging countries and the third world. And that increase is just dramatic. In developing countries particularly, and this slide shows it, eggs, meat, milk, everything will go up over the years to come. We are anticipating at least a doubling demand of animal protein in our generation. Doubling of the demand in animal protein in our generation. This is largely driven by incomes. On the x-axis you see per capita gross national income. On the y-axis it shows meat consumption. As you can see, the more disposable income people have, like here in the States, the higher is their meat consumption. The lower their disposable income, the lower is their meat consumption. This slide was taken from Livestock's Long Shadow. It shows where in the world we have the largest concentrations of livestock. By far, India and China are the hotspots. They always have been, they always will. That's where we have most livestock. And that's where we have a dramatic increase in demand for livestock. This slide is more dramatic. It shows in color where in the world we have arable land. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the only area in the world where we can grow food for human consumption. And whether we have 3 or 7 or 9 billion people in the world, that's what limits us in producing food. And that's what many people in this country do not understand. They think we should go back to the 1950s to have operations with 20 pigs and 15 chickens and 5 cows, and that would feed our planet. It will not feed our planet. What will feed our planet is lessons that we have learned in this very country, and I will show you why. This slide was also taken from Livestock Some Shadow. It shows developing regions, so the third world, from 1990 to 2020 for greenhouse gases. And as you can see, greenhouse gases have been going up and will continue to go up in the developing parts of the world. In the developed parts of the world, so places like the US or Europe, greenhouse gases are tapering off. They are not increasing. Even though we're increasing production dramatically, our carbon footprint is not going up. This has everything to do with this slide, namely that production efficiency, output per cow in this case, of fat and protein-corrected milk, and the carbon footprint in this case, are directly related. The less a cow produces, as in this case, the higher is her carbon footprint. The more a cow produces, the lower is her carbon footprint. Productivity and environmental footprint are directly related. The higher the productivity, the lower the environmental footprint, particularly true for the carbon footprint. And this is a result of the delusion of maintenance. Okay? This is a direct result of that. So this slide here shows it a little better. It shows a California cow producing on average 20,000 pounds of milk per year, as opposed to a Mexican cow, which produces on average 4,000 pounds of milk per year. It takes 5 Mexican cows to produce the same amount of milk as 1 California cow. 5 Mexican cows produce the same amount of milk as 1 California cow. It takes 20 Indian cows, 20 cows from India, to produce the same amount of milk as 1 California cow. Now, and that's where this whole discussion of global impact of livestock really comes into play. Think about how resource hungry an Indian cow is, and how much he relatively produces with respect to environmental footprints. And that's why global averages of environmental footprint are so disastrous for a country like ours here. We don't want to be in one boat with India or with Pakistan or with China. We're totally different. The FAO, the United Nations FAO, totally gets that today. This year was a work they did in 2010 showing different regions in the world for the dairy sector and the carbon footprint. And it shows that by and large North America has the lowest carbon footprint across all regions in the world. And again, this is North America, this is not the United States. If you were to divvy out Mexico from that column would be half of what it is on this slide. They've done the same thing for all the other species too. And all of these results show that efficiencies, production efficiencies, have everything to do with the carbon footprint, namely lowering it. The more efficient, the more you lower it. This slide was also from the FAO. It shows ruminant meat, dairy, and non-ruminant meat with respect to carbon footprints, basically, and different regions in the world are demarked in different colors. Again, the US by far has the lowest carbon footprint per unit of production. And so this is a direct result of using different instruments, namely reproductive efficiency, veterinary health, protection and prevention, and improved genetics, along with feeding more energy-dense feeds. The combination of those 4 instruments leads to a lowering of the total herd numbers, and that is precisely what we've done in this country here. In the United States, we today have 9 million dairy cows. We have 16 million fewer than in 1950. Even though we have much fewer cows today, we only have basically 2/3 of the carbon footprint that we did 70 years ago. 2/3 of the carbon footprint that we had 70 years ago today. And what we've learned in this country over the last 70 years is transferable across regions in the world today. We can help a country like India dramatically reducing its environmental footprint in the livestock sector. Not by transferring technologies and techniques one-to-one, of course helping them doing it in a way that's sustainable under their conditions, but we can certainly help with that. An example that is just amazing to me comes from China. I was there recently and I talked to some government officials. They have a 5-year plan. As you know, they call themselves still communist. You know, I don't really believe that, but they call themselves that. They have their 5-year plans, and they swear that they want to be more efficient in their livestock production. Currently, half of the world's pigs are housed in China. There are 50,000 sows, each with 20 pigs. They produce 1 billion pigs a year in China. 1 billion pigs a year. A staggering number. But of that billion pigs that they produce, 400 million never make it to market. They have a pre-weaning mortality of 40% in China. 40%. Think about all the resources that go into, first of all, getting to 20 pigs a year, but then losing that many is just absolutely staggering. And why does that matter to you? Oh, not to you, but to the people you work with, because they will need inputs for their livestock production. And some of those inputs come from here. I traveled recently to Southern California, where the vast majority of our alfalfa is now packed out and shipped to China. They're willing to pay just about any price for our alfalfa. We're not just exporting alfalfa, we're also exporting our water to China by exporting our alfalfa. That's not just true for alfalfa. It's true for just about any commodity you can think of. And if you think that a producer in Nebraska or in Iowa can compete with a producer in China, think again. If they want to feed their people with more pork or with more chickens or whatever, they will pay whatever price they need to pay in order to get those commodities. These kind of issues affect U.S. livestock production directly and today. Directly and today. Today, most people at the FAO and throughout the world would say that what we shouldn't do is just go back to the 1950s. What we shouldn't do is what our vegan friends tell us to do, which is either stop eating livestock products or go back to the 1950s type production system. But what most people who really understand the issue will say is have efficient livestock production, large-scale efficient livestock production, not necessarily CAFOs, but could be CAFOs, but use improved genetics, use improved production techniques, use veterinary care that we know works, use better nutrition in order to satisfy the consumer demand with as small a herd as possible. They call that sustainable intensification. And I like that term. I really like that term. I think everybody can come together underneath that. Because it's intensification on the one hand, but not just being a large and efficient livestock operation, but a livestock operation that also takes care of other sustainability areas, including animal welfare, including food safety, including workers. Very important part of sustainability are workers. One of the most neglected issues we have in animal agriculture, in my opinion, are workers. We are now facing that in a place like California, where we don't have enough workers. We just no longer get enough workers from Mexico, and that's really felt day to day. Huge issue to our sustainability. And so today, and that's one of my last slides, the FAO says, the United Nations FAO says, that production intensity and emission intensity are inversely related. Production intensity and emission intensity are inversely related. Think about that. You think that our average media representative understands that? I don't think so. They think exactly the opposite is true. Our public does not understand this at all. And it is something that we have failed overall to communicate. What is encouraging to me is that the international livestock sector and academics have come together, and not just insulated come together, but together with many of the national governments and with several of the NGOs, like World Wildlife Fund. They've come together under the umbrella of the United Nations FAO. The FAO said, what we've done in the past with livestock from shadow, we don't want to repeat. We don't want to repeat. We need a global way of assessing the environmental footprint of livestock. One methodology that can be used all over the world. And they established a project called LEAP. LEAP is referred to as the Partnership on Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance. This is, in my opinion, probably the largest effort of its kind. Again, including countries like the Netherlands, Australia, and, France, and so on. On the one hand, the entire global livestock sector, beef, dairy, poultry, the feed sector, and NGOs like World Wildlife Fund and so on, under the roof, under the umbrella of the FAO. This new project is a 3-year project that will come up with one methodology of assessing the impact livestock has on the environment. A very important project, in my opinion, very much following the precautionary principle. I was made the chairman of this project, and I'm very pleased to say that we are now in year 2 of this 3-year effort, and next year we will conclude that. And I think this will be very important because it will bring together all the different players, and it will help us to come up with one methodology that helps us to fairly quantify what the impacts are of our production versus other people's production systems, and how we can minimize our impact.